woodcraft, helping you make woodwork.
I kind of like the way it works, because once I get my box to this part right here, this is when I start working on the top. Now I take my top and I'm going to make my top to fit this box. You know, I'm not going to pre-make it and go, I hope it fits. Well, this is about the part where I would measure my box. And if you look inside here, when you do that on the router table, you don't get square corners on a router table. You're going to get round corners. So I go and I cut a blank, and the blank, I can go and I can check the size of it by sticking it in here and then like this to make sure it fits. Well, it's not going to go in there because it doesn't have round corners when I cut it. It's squared. So I found a radius that matches this. And believe it or not, the one that matches this corner perfectly was the head of my hammer. I was looking for something round about that size. A quarter was too small. A 50-cent piece seemed a little bit too big, but my hammer was really pretty good. So I took and I drew the radius on these. And then I went over to my belt sander, or actually the disc on my belt sander, and I rounded them over. Go back and constantly back and forth until they fit. And then once they fit, once I get a fit that looks like this, you know, I'm pretty happy with it. Now, I make it cut to fit. There's a little bit of slop in here. Now, I could get myself in trouble if the wood expands, but this lid's going to come on and off here numerous times, and I'm going to work on it a lot before I get the final size down. So there is a lot more sanding that's going to happen along these edges. It's so much easier to take wood off than to try to put it back on or restart over because you cut a piece too small. Okay, once I got my lid kind of in this stage where I like it to fit, and then it's about this stage I like to make the handle for it. Now, the handle I make out of a contrasting wood, and I've got here, one sitting here, and usually it's about 3 inches long, about an inch or so deep. You can make it any way you want. And the handle, I like to go into the lid with a spline. Now usually I've got some of these extra splines left over from the corners, because when you go and put these splines in, you have to usually have several different ones. You find some are too loose and some are too tight, and you've sanded them and moved them, you know, shaped them to get the perfect fit on there, because if you get them too loose in there, you'll see the glue. If they're too tight, you won't get them all the way in. You'll have a little gap when you go to sand on them. So I usually have some of these splines left, so I take an 1/8 router bit on my router table, and I'll cut a little slot for my spline, and in my lid, I'll cut a corresponding one. Okay, and then I'll do a little test fit. This actual handle is about that time too. If I got it the way I like it, I shape it a little bit. And this is where I'll use a Dremel with a little, sometimes a little sanding drum on it, or some of the little carvers, just to give it a little bit of texture, because I'm going to be carving this box all up and give it little ripples. So I'll give the handle a little ripples. So once I get that, and I'm happy with it, I'll do a test fit on it. Okay, don't glue it in. If you glue it in, you're going to be sad, because you're going to be doing a lot of carving on this box, and it is so easy to slip and hit that handle, and then it's no fun trying to fix that. So once I got the handle fixed in, or made the way I like, then I need to kind of make a recess for it to sit in, because if I don't make this recess, this is not going to sit flush in the top. So it's about that time I'll set my lid back on, and I'll kind of center it, and I'll have my handle centered, and then I'll make a couple pencil lines, and then I'll take a little, I use a little Japanese handsaw, and I'll cut down, about 1/8 of an inch on both sides, and you can clean this out with a chisel. What I found works pretty good for me to get a good flat bottom is I take a straight cutting bit on my router table, I'll raise it up, and then I'll kind of go across, and the last few millimeters of wood, I will use a razor knife and just trim out. And then I just kind of go back and forth, raising my bit up and down, making my cuts a little bit deeper until I got it so it fits really good here, that the box is fitting inside, it's not raised up, and it's not bottoming out. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. So now we've got a lid that'll fit inside our box, and I kind of like to talk to right now is getting this lid to be able to open. Okay, now if you just put this lid in here and you put your hinge pins in here, you're going to open this lid up and it's going to go, and it's going to go up about that far, and it's not going to open. It's going to rub. So you actually kind of need to take your lid and relieve some of the material off the back here. Now this lid's going to come on and off here a lot of different times, checking it out to make sure there are no rub spots. And what I've found that works really, really good are roofing nails. I take some roofing nails and I polished them up a little bit with some sandpaper so they're nice and smooth. And of course, before I do that, I've got to drill some holes on each side here for my hinge pins. And that's what the roofing nails are going to go into. And I think in my diagram here, I believe that there's actually a picture there that shows that the holes are 1/4 inch down and 1.5 inches from the back for this. Now what that all equates to is, since this is 3/4 inch stock, if you used a thicker stock, that location of that holes would be different. It's going to be different. So what I do is I mark that, I drill it, and I use a drill press. I've used a drill press before. I've done it by hand before. You kind of want to get these holes straight in here, because once I drill through, I'm also going to drill into my lid. And as you can actually see, there are little holes in my lid here, 1.5 inches. But what these roofing nails will do is, while I'm working on shaping the back portion of that lid, I can slide these roofing nails in and out, and I can work my lid, and I can sound and feel and look for rub spots on my wood. And if I find a rough spot or a rub spot, I can pop those nails back out real quick, go over to my sander, look for the spot, sand it down. So you're coming back and forth several times, taking this lid on and off and on and off, until you get to that point where that lid just opens up nice and smooth. And the roofing nails is just a little trick, because you're going to have it on and off, and it just makes it so much easier to be able to pull that guy on and off real quick. For the hinge pins, when I do finally finish this box, what I like to use is brass welding rod. When I drilled those holes, I drilled them 1.5 inches deep. So I'm going to cut off about 1.5 inches, maybe a little bit more. And I'm going to, when my final assembly is done, I will put these in there. And the reason I like brass so much is brass sands really easy. Because now these little pins are going to be protruding through the sides here. I want to be able to sand it smooth. Now if it was steel or something like that, I would never be able to sand it. I'd end up having to grind it, and then I would get into the wood. But the brass is really, really nice. And an 1/8 inch brass welding rod, believe it or not, is the same size as a roofing nail. That's why the roofing nails work so good for doing that lid shaping. The next part I'd like to talk about is this insert, or the medallion, if you will. Once again, I've got an ugly jig for doing this. And it's pretty simple, believe it or not. It's a piece of plywood with a couple different boards screwed to it. Now, this piece, I've already set it up, but these pieces here, the pine here, the big boards on the bottom, are made to butt against my lid. And as you can see here, I've drawn an outline on my lid here for the size of my medallion, making the spacing all the same. So that guy fits inside here, nice and tight so it doesn't move around. Okay, now it's at this time here that I've got another block of wood the same size as the piece of wood I want to make my medallion out of. Okay, this is kind of the important step, because what I want to do is I want to route out, or I want to remove material inside this lid here so that it matches perfect or almost perfect to what my medallion size is. So we're going to take our piece of wood here, and we're going to set it up on the reference lines that I've made here. Now these other blocks of wood here, and sometimes I'm a kind of a forgetful person, so I wrote number 1, start with this piece, and I put arrows to point in because these screws are offset, and if you put this in backwards, you could be screwing into your lid. So I will butt it up against this end here. And I'll take my next piece and I'm going to butt it up there. And my third piece. And then the last guy here. Now this spear piece, this extra piece I did, now I'm going to remove it. So now I've got my lid in there, and I've got an opening that matches the size of my medallion perfectly. Now here's where I'm going to take a pattern bit on my router, and I'm going to route this all out. Do a recess inside this lid. And I like to go down about 3/8 of an inch deep, depending upon how thick my piece is. I can go a little bit more, but I don't usually like to go down more than half the thickness of my lid. And I'm going to route this all out. Now it's a lot of routing, there's a lot of material coming out here. You could speed up the process by taking a Forstner bit and drilling it out, removing a lot of the material that way before you get to your router. But a pattern bit with a top bearing on it that'll run in here, and it's going to come out and it's going to make the recess for my medallion. Now once again, I'm going to run into that same problem I had in here. It's not going to leave rounded corners. Well, that's okay. I don't want rounded corners or sharp corners on my medallion. So once again, I'm going to do a little radius. Now what I found is on this radius on the inside here, believe it or not, a dime fits pretty close. So I'm going to take a dime, because I always have one in my pocket usually, and I'm going to draw a little radius on the corners, and I'm going to go over to my belt sander and I'm going to work it back and forth, go back, check the fit in my lid, and go back and forth till I get a nice, pretty fit. And when I get a fit that I'm happy with, like this, I glue it in. So it's kind of at this point here you'll see, hey, okay, yeah, there's a lot of material in here. My medallion's glued in, my lid's fitting in my box. And you kind of get to this point here where if we put it all together, we've got a box with splines. We've got a handle that's ready to go that we haven't glued in yet. And now comes the fun part. You spent a lot of time and a lot of hours making this box. Now you want to shape it. Okay, there's a couple different ways to shape it. You could take a good old palm sander, some aggressive grit paper on it, and you could start working on it, shaping it. It's going to take a long time, and it's going to be real dusty, and it's going to drive you a little bit crazy. A lot of times what I'll do is, in this case, I like to make waves on my boxes, so I'll draw a few reference lines on it, and I take my box and I mount it to a good bench vise. Actually, I've got a couple of these little tables similar to the one over there that's got the holes with the bench dogs in it, and I'll clamp that guy in there, and then I'll tack it. And what I'll usually attack it with, an angle grinder. Okay. Yes, not the angle grinder. Yes, the angle grinder. Okay, but on the angle grinder, I've got what they call a sanding flappy wheel. As you can kind of see on the edges here, it's lots of little sanding pieces of sanding paper that are all gone around the edge, and this guy has been well used. This particular one has been well used. And I've taken the guard off, so caution. My best advice to you is to a big visor and some hearing protection, and I do mine in the driveway of my house instead of inside the garage, because chips are gonna fly and they're gonna go everywhere. And the first time you do it, it's a little nerve-wracking because you spent a lot of time making this box, and you're about to tack it with an angle grinder. So I will get it all set, get it clamped down, and it's up to you where you start. I usually start on my lid, and I will start grinding away, grinding away, grinding away. I'll stop and I'll feel it, because on this one, when it feels, to me, when it feels right or it feels good, you're getting close. Okay, and then once I get the top done, I'll flip it up, reclamp it, and I will do the front, and I'll do the sides, and sometimes I will transition around the corners until I get something I'm happy with. And no two are going to be the same. They're going to be different. And one other suggestion I have is, when you do make these, make more than one. Make 2 or 3 of them, because somebody's going to see that and they're going to go, hey, can you make me one of those? Or if there's one that you're really unhappy with, that you got a little too aggressive with the grinder, you've got other ones and your project is still going on. But after I get it all the way ground down the way I like it, that's when I'll go back and I'll attach my handle to it, and then I'll do my finish sanding. And my finish sanding, a lot of times I'll go back to the random orbit sander and do a lot of it, and then a lot of hand sanding. And if you guys kind of noticed, inside these boxes, I made a divider, and this is kind of my own idea of a divider. I kind of wanted to make one that was unique for me. It looks a little bit like a Greek symbol, but you can make a divider any way you want. I made this one so it's removable in and out depending upon how the person's going to use the box. They can use it or not use it. But there are a lot of different dividers, a lot of different ways to do it. That kind of completes it. Does anybody have any questions about anything? What grit is that? This one right here, I believe, is an 80 grit one. You can get them in grits down to like 50. Of course, the coarser the grit, the more aggressive it's going to be. The rougher the cut, you know. So you can get a couple different ones and switch back and forth. There are a couple different carving machines that you can also use for this. The Merlin is an excellent one. Maybe one of the Holy Galahad, which is a cutter that's kind of a tipped cutter that we sell here in the store. It's got holes through it so you can see the grooves when you cut it. I don't think I would go with one of those chainsaw cutter ones. I think those are a little too aggressive, but you could do it several different ways. Does that kind of answer your question, Bob?
See one of your boxes on the Antiques Roadshow in 2 years.
I don't know. I've made about a dozen or 15 of these boxes. One thing I've found is my family has a family reunion every 2 years, and we take handmade items and we auction them off, and that's what pays for our reunions. And I've made a couple of these, and I've had guys fight over them, and the bidding has got up quite high on them. So they're pretty popular, and I got a lot of guys like them because they're a little more manly than a jewelry box. You know, some place to put a guy's watch, and do they still have cufflinks? But you know, something like that. So if anybody has any other questions? Okay, great. Well, thank you all for coming today. I hope I didn't confuse you or rattle on too much. You guys all have a good afternoon.